Why would you ever want to learn how to play in the key of E flat when you could just use a capo and put it on the 3rd fret? You could play C shapes. Sounds like E flat. You could put it on the 1st fret and play D shapes. That sounds like E flat. You could put it on the 11th fret and play E shapes. I'm not doing that. I'm not doing that. And that's the whole point of this video. Sometimes it's worth learning the flat keys, even though there's a lot of people out there who don't believe that. It's what's called limiting beliefs. Now, there's a belief in the guitar world that folk guitar players don't know how to play in the flat keys. And if ever a time crops up, you know, where like somebody's gonna play an E flat, or you're hearing a recording that sounds like E flat, it's probably out of tune, and they're either playing in E or in D, which is right next to E flat, or maybe it sounds like B flat. It's probably the key of A, right? Which is sometimes the case. It's often the case, but it's not always the case. Today, I want to talk about, you know, how to know and give you some tools so that you can do this stuff without a capo, as well as lift the players who figured this stuff out on their own, right? They didn't need a capo. They knew enough about the guitar and music to figure this out while maintaining that beautiful, jangly, bare quality that we love about the folk guitar. And Shake Hands and Tell Me Goodbye is exactly the tune to do it. My name is Kyle Orla. Welcome back to the studio for another episode of the Alphabetical Blues. We're checking out the most contextually important keys for the folk guitar idiom. We've done A, we've done B flat, we've done C, D, E. I'm sneaking in E flat, right? Now it's not exactly in alphabetical order now, but I didn't want to start with E flat and freak anybody out, so I started with E. But we're gonna do E flat today. What you will not need is a capo, but what you will need is a pick, because we're checking out Walter Jacobs of the Mississippi Sheiks. He taught us how to play in B flat, and he's going to teach us how to play in E flat. We're going to check out how I know it's in E flat, the chord forms, the very jazzy chord progression, how Walter Jacobs connected all his chords together that really show his comfortability with the key of E flat. But let's set this up a little bit first, because there's a couple really interesting things going on. Of course, the stuff on your guitar, yes, but also the form of the song. It's almost something you'd see in the Great American Songbook versus something you'd hear on the Great American Folk Anthology. So the majority of blues out there are 12 bars, hence the 12-bar blues, but it's not strictly so. Of course, you know about like the 8-bar blues. This is a 16-bar blues, but it actually has more in common with its 32-bar jazz cousin, rhythm changes. And the structures are exactly the same. They're both A, A, B, A. Now the A is the first idea, and then there's like an A prime, which is almost the same as the first A, but there's something slightly different. And then there's a B, brand new idea, and goes back to the A, which is going to be identical as that first A. The only difference from the 16 bar and the 32 bar is that the 16 bar is kind of an abbreviated idea. Each section's about half as long. It'll make sense once I show you the song, I promise. But before I show you his actual chord forms, it's important to know how these forms work in the chord progression, the greater chord progression, so you understand how this stuff works musically. If at any moment these go over your head, I'll have them all tabbed out for you over on the Patreon. You can check them out there. So the other difference of this tune versus the standard 12-bar blues is we're not going to just stick to the 1-4-5 chord progression. Rather, we're going to lead into that cycle of fifths that we talked about in the key of C. It's called the 1-6-2-5. So in E flat is our 1 chord, and our 6th chord is C. If you look at the circle of fifths, that C is usually minor, right? But in the cycle of fives, we make it major. Why? Because the 5th of F, that next chord, is C. So C is leading us to F. F is the 5 of B flat. B flat is the 5 of E. Hence this cycle of fives. Now some songs like Rag and C, they just do that over and over and over. That's the entire song. It's sometimes called 5-chord ragtime or a 5-chord rag. This tune expands the idea. Instead of doing the cycle of fives over and over and over, the second time around we delay the resolution, bringing us into this B section. The B section is very simple, just a 1 chord and a 4 chord. And then that last section is exactly the same as the first A. And it brings us back to the beginning. So that's the form and the chord progression. Get to know them, understand them, because they'll show up again and again in a multitude of keys. Let's check out how Walter Jacobs, though, took it into the key of E flat while maintaining the beautiful folk guitar sound that we know and love from the Mississippi Sheiks. So to me, what makes the Mississippi Sheiks a string band that played jazz styles versus a jazz band with string band stylings. Now, it's a slippery slope here to define the differences, but to me, a part of that does come down to the chord voicings of the guitar. Now, early jazz guitar players would see E flat and play something more like this. This is an E flat 6 chord versus Sam Chapman's choice was this, which is just an E flat chord with an open G string. Now, both give you different sounds, and they kind of lend themselves towards the conventions of the genre. And this sound kind of lends itself more to like a choppier sound, right? More percussive. This sound, way more open, way more resonant, and it kind of fits the aesthetic and needs of the string band stuff. If you checked out my recent video on what I call folk chords, you'll know that Walter Jacobs, he's not alone in this concept of taking first position chords up the neck without changing anything, right? Sometimes it works perfectly. If you check out this chord, every note in it is in the key of E flat. It doesn't always work out that way. You go to the next position up, there's some wonky notes. So it's not as simple as just moving it around. You have to have a little bit of finesse. But in the case of this tune, it works perfectly because E flat has this open G string and there is a G in an E flat chord, and it brings you perfectly to the next chord in the song, which happens to be a C chord. And there's actually only one other chord shape in the song, and that's this thumb over F chord. And you can also do it as a bar chord if you feel like, but just know that kind of a convention of the time is the thumb over. Of course, the bar chord works just fine as well, and that will get you F as well as B flat, or you can use your thumb. You could also get this A flat chord on the 4th fret, but let me play you through this entire progression with his chords, and I'll show you this unique thing he did with the A flat chord. So you got E flat, C, F, B flat, B flat. Do it again, but this time we're going to extend the F and extend the B flat. B section, here we go. This A flat, he just hits the root. Doesn't play the chord. Now, you could play the chord if you wanted to, but that's what he did. And there you go. Now you have some really cool, unique voicings that you would probably never learn in your Guitar Center guitar lesson. And you could go ahead and stop the video here and not watch the rest of it, because what more do you need, right? You have the chords. Well, it's one thing to play the chords. It's another to learn how Walter Jacobs connected these chords. Connected them to themselves, connected them to each other. So that's what I'm going to get into next. It's one thing to do it in the key of G. It's another to learn how to connect chords in the key so that you don't really play very often, right? I almost messed that up. Did you hear that? I almost played a B instead of B flat. Do forgive me. I don't play an E flat every day either. So connecting basses, let's start with how they connect to themselves. You've probably done this one before. This is the 5th below. So you can connect your E flat chord to the 5th below E flat. The other one he does is on the F chord, where he goes to the 5th above. And then when he goes to B flat, he actually goes to the octave above. So those are 3 ideas. You can go to the 5th below, you can go to the 5th above, or you can go to the octave above. Don't be too careful if you hit the octave twice. Just make sure you isolate it on the strong beat, on beats 1 and 3. 1, 2, 3, 4. That's all you need to do. The other would be the bass slide, connecting basses just by sliding your finger. So in the case of F, he slides up to B flat. This sounds really cool and syncopated. It makes it easier to shift from the 1st fret all the way up to the 6th fret. It's also how I know he's playing this B flat instead of like that B flat. Now the last one I'll show you here is the bass walk. It's also the first one he used and really shows how well he really understood the key he was in. So we move from E flat down to C, and he gets there by walking down the major scale. Now he could have walked down the dominant scale. He could have gone fully chromatic from E flat. But again, I feel like he's teaching us how well he really just knew the key of E flat. As always, the tab and the slow play along is available over on the Patreon for this and every other tune in this series and every other thing I do here on YouTube as well. You can also just join up for free and get only the chord progression. That would be fine as well. You can make up your own stuff. If you want to take advantage of the full Alphabetical Blues series, you can join up for $10 and get access to a long-form lesson in this tune and 2 other tunes in E flat. We're going to talk about 2 other tunes in E flat this month at the end of the month. So we'll see you there. Otherwise, key of F next month. We'll see you there. Take care, everybody.